Welcome to Tips to Completing the 1 to 4 Family Residential Contract. I'm Kristi Davis, MetroTex Association's Forms and Contracts Committee, and Maggie York, MetroTex MLS Instructor.
Hello, all.
Maggie, as you know, many of our members find it difficult to complete the 1 to 4 family contract, and part of that is because they find it a little bit intimidating. In today's short video, we're going to take a highlight for some tips and tricks on how to complete the 1 to 4 family residential contract and the third-party financing. I'll be doing the hybrid view of the few blanks that seem to be a little bit more confusing than not. And Maggie, you're going to be walking them through how to actually utilize Zipforms to complete it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And just a quick little note, I want to make sure that when you go in that you are printing out a contract. If this is maybe your first couple of times to fill it out, make sure you print out a blank contract and highlight every single blank that you might have the opportunity to fill in. And then I encourage you to read through the contract forwards and backwards and forwards, and talk with your broker on making sure you understand what it is to complete, what your brokerages want you to do with some of those blanks, and how you can make sure that you're filling it in and negotiating it correctly for your buyers and sellers. All right, Maggie, are you ready to roll?
I am, and I've already gone in and added our 1 to 4 family residential contract. And you'll see when I hover over this, I am seeing I have 1121, so the most recent of the 1 to 4 family residential contract. And I have already added our third-party financing addendum. Once again, when I hover over it, it looks like I do have the most up-to-date form. So we are good to go.
And that's certainly a very important thing. No one wants to be using the wrong form. So make sure you are checking those dates when completing a contract. All right, let's jump in with the parties to the contract.
All right,
You
so yes, ma'am. Clicking into this field, it opens up and asks me, do I have a first seller or a second seller? For today, we just have our one seller, which we will be using Charlie Brown for our practice today. Once I click out, it's going to plug that in for me. And now all we need is our buyer. So again, if you'll notice, all I'm doing is clicking into that field, pops open with a first and second buyer if applicable. Again, we're only going to do the one. So today we will have Snoopy Beagle is buying a house from Charlie Brown.
don't you just love our names we chose today? So next is going to be our property. And Maggie, there are some options in finding out the actual legal description for a contract. You can find that through MLS. You can find that on the tax rolls. You can find it by actually communicating with the listing agent and ensuring that you do have the right address. So we always are going to have a lot, a block, a subdivision, a city, a county, and then we're also going to have what we know as the physical mailing address. And Maggie so diligently has filled these out completely. She knows this contract backwards and forwards on how to fill out these blanks for sure.
With great help from Kristi, I assure you. All right, there we go. Our property
Perfect.
location information is entered.
And then we're going to go to 2D, talking about exclusions. And the best place to look for these is going to be in the MLS printout. What is going to be excluded and not convey with the sale of the home. And that also you might communicate with that listing agent as to what that might be if you think there might be some exclusions. And we're going to fill in a pot rack.
There we go. What's next, Kristi?
Sales price. So we're going to do line 3A is our down payment or the cash portion. That's going to be $100,000 today. And then that shows automatically, it pops into line C as our sales price. So now we have to We're making an offer on a $500,000 home, and we're making the offer at list price. So, and it is subject to a third-party financing addendum. So now we need to fill in what our loan amount is.
How's that look, Kristi?
That looks perfect, Maggie. And you'll notice she didn't have to really do too much math right there. But if she did, I know there's also a calculator, right, Maggie, through here that someone could pop in?
There is on the desktop, but there's not a calculator on Zipforms itself. But there are calculators available through your desktop if you go through your Start button.
Perfect, perfect. And then paragraph 4, this looks a little different than in years past in former contract versions. So we've got, do we have a residential lease attached to this, a fixture lease, a natural resource lease? And if we did have a residential lease or a fixture lease, those have separate addendums in which we would fill out. And for today's purposes, we're not going to have any of those attached, so we're going to move on.
And I just want to point out real quick,
Oh,
now that we're on page 2, notice how the address is already filled in at the top of each of these pages for you. So you want to make sure if you see any discrepancies with that address, like I do have an extra little comma there, I might go back and check it later on, but the way it appears here should match the way you've entered it on that first page.
and that is very important to make sure that you do have that address on each and every page of the contract. So make adjustments should you need to. All right, back to the earnest money and option. So now where we're going to talk about is quickly, this is our earnest money. We're delivering it to a title company. So and we're going to put in our title company name. And make sure you fill in an address for the title company. And if you'll notice in parentheses, it has address, not name, address. And then this is the amount of the earnest money. And today we're putting down 1% of our sales price. Whoops, probably one more zero in there, Maggie.
Oh, so sorry. There we go.
Perfect. And then in our newest version of our contract, we are also delivering our option fee to the title company. And our option fee today is $250. Perfect. And then it says buyer shall deliver additional earnest money of blank. And we're not going to do any additional earnest money this time, but I'm going to show you a little trick as if you were doing some. So Maggie, if we wanted to put a word in here, what would someone do?
I'm so glad you asked, Kristi, because whenever you see a field like this that follows a little dollar sign, the dollar sign tells us that this field is already formatted and that it wants a number above 0. So in this case, because there's not any additional earnest money, if we were to enter in 0 or try to enter in not applicable or NA, I don't know if you can hear me typing, it does not like it. I can put as many zeros as I like, but when I click out, you'll notice they have disappeared. And that's that formatting that's attached. So what we have to do, Kristi, is we have to get rid of the formatting. So I've clicked into that field. I'm going to hit the space bar 2 times. Notice it changes the color of that field. It tells me, hey, Maggie, the formatting is gone. So I now should be able to put anything that I want. I can enter in my zeros, or if I wanted, I could do my NA for not applicable. That way I'm not leaving any blanks in my contract, and I'm able to enter in the correct representation for our contract today.
Perfect. Well, let's move on to 5B, which is our termination option. So we've already said we're going to be paying the seller $250 for an option fee, but now we've negotiated that we're going to receive 7 days. So we're going to put in 7 right there. and then we'll move on. Now let's move down to title policy, paragraph 6A. Buyer and seller. Now, mind you, we're working on behalf of a buyer today. We're filling out a purchase offer. So we're going to say that the seller is going to be paying for the title policy. And then we're clicking in again back to that same title company in which we're delivering earnest and option fee. Perfect. And then we have a few options here. We have the option of having the standard printed exemptions as to discrepancies, conflicts, shortages, and boundaries to either be amended or deleted from the title policy. And then if we are going to amend them, we want to check II. And then because we're making the offer, we're going to say that we're going to ask the seller or the buyer to pay for this. And as we are filling this out, we're going to put that since it's the buyer's election, we're going to say that the buyer is going to go ahead and pay for that and negotiate over some other more difficult or higher priced items. All right, let's move on to the survey. As a buyer, most of your title companies are going to suggest, and I too think it's a great idea, that if buyer buys a new survey, they then own that survey and have rights and remedies to go back to that surveyor should something be wrong. But I see many agents and buyers and sellers negotiate that the seller is going to provide their existing survey. So let's go ahead and complete it as if we are asking the seller to provide us their existing survey. So that's C1.
Oop, sorry about that. There we go.
And then we're going to ask the seller to provide us that survey within 3 days after the effective date. We see somewhere between 3 and 5 days in there normally. And then as the buyer, we're going to say that if for any reason this survey is not accepted by our lender or title company, then the buyer will pay for a new survey. All right. And then let's go down to D, objections. I see this blank all too often, even though maybe there's no activity that your buyer is going to do on the property or think they're going to do, like install an in-ground gunite pool in the northeast corner of the property. I still highly encourage that there's a number of days to be filled in that buyer has the ability to object once they receive the title commitment, exception documents, and the survey. So Maggie's typing in a storage shed.
And how many days did we say, Kristi?
Let's type in 5 days. That gives the buyer 5 days in which to object to this activity not being allowed on the property. Now moving on to title notices. This property is not in a mandatory property owners membership association. So member and property owners association. So we're going to check no. If that was the case, you have an addendum that would be attached to this contract. All right, let's keep moving. Statutory tax districts, tidewaters, annexations. Again, I'm going to stress right now, if you are watching this video and you are looking for more detailed contract information, education, or MLS and online Zipforms training, please reach out to our membership department, excuse me, not our membership department, my MetroTex online, and look at our calendar and see what other classes are available to you. There is a wealth of information provided by our MLS department as well as our professional development department on educating you on all things contract and the proper way to fill them out on our tech tools. All right, let's keep going, Maggie.
All righty.
Property conditions. We've got two options here, 7B, 1 or 2 or 3. This is talking about the seller's disclosure notice. So if the buyer has already received that notice, then go ahead and check box 1. In this case, we're going to pretend that the buyer has not received it and it is required by the property code. So we're going to check 2, and then we're going to say that the seller has 2 days after the effective date of the contract to provide the buyer the seller's disclosure notice. So I just kind of flipped it up just a little bit. Instead of it being 3 and 5, I made it 2. All right, let's go on down to the property acceptance and condition. So our contracts in Texas are all as is contracts. So if there is nothing that the buyer says, oh my goodness, this must be completed or taken care of or replaced, or I just absolutely cannot purchase this home, we would check box 1 if there's nothing that needs to be done, or if there was something that needed to be done that was important to the buyer to move forward, we would put check box 2 and fill in what that specific treatment is.
So for an example, if we needed a new dishwasher, would this be the place to ask for it, Kristi?
It would be. And I would encourage, yep, there you go, like brand and model dishwasher. Always important to give some parameters around this and not leave it at someone's discretion so much. All right.
Makes sense.
Now, again, just reiterating, we're talking about the tips and tricks on filling out these blanks, not truly to educate you on the entire contract. So we are doing a flyby through this. So now let's talk about the residential service contract, or formally and commonly known as home warranty. So that is where you've negotiated. So buyer wants some protection, some added protection on things that might go wrong. So let's say we don't have a pool and it's just a home that's under 3,000 square feet. So we want a little bit of upgraded coverage on that residential service contract. So something like 650 would be a great number to put in there. All right. And if by chance on that broker and sales agent, if we were party to the contract, if we were purchasing it, or we were helping our significant other, our child, our parents, that would we be where we would denote who we were and how we were being a part of this contract. We don't have anything like that in this contract, so let's go ahead and go down to closing. This is the date that you're actually planning to close on the property and be ready for it to fund. So Maggie, show us a little trick on 30 days out from today, that might be our closing date, and just where some things we always want to make sure that it fills in correctly.
Absolutely. And so this is actually really easy. When I click into this box, it brings up a calendar for me. And so it's just scrolling through to find that upcoming date for us. And you said 30 days, which is going to put us about the 11th, of January. Are you all right with that? Using that? Oh, I don't know why it keeps going backwards. Using that as a date, Kristi?
Let's try it.
And then
It's
when
a
I
good
click
idea
on it,
not to close on Monday or Friday in closing on a contract. So this is a Tuesday, a great option.
awesome. And you'll notice once I've clicked on it, it fills in the correct date for me as well as sets up that format, bringing in our year as well.
Perfect, perfect. And then possession, moving down to paragraph 10, the buyer's possession. In our contract today, we're not going to be discussing the temporary lease back. So we're going to say that the seller is going to deliver possession at time of closing and funding. But please make sure you're double checking and having those conversations with your buyers as to what's going to be important to them, and know that this may be a negotiation component with that seller. Paragraph 11, that special provisions paragraph. This is where we are not, as Realtor members, to practice law. So we have to be really careful what we put into this paragraph. We're obligated to only put in factual statements or business details that help a component of the contract, to not necessarily leave ambiguity or try to change the language or the intent of the contract. If by chance there is direct language that needs to be filled in, highly encourage counseling with your client that they need to seek legal representation to get proper wording and understand the parameters and what that will do to them should something go awry. Something in here also is that if there is a form already available, we talked about the third-party financing. If you were to put something in here that seller shall promptly apply for financing with loan terms to be, 2.5% for a 30-year fixed loan, that would be misuse. And there is a form that's promulgated by TREC. So you could be at fault for misuse of contracts. So always note, if there's a form promulgated by TREC, you must use that and not utilize special provisions for that. All right, let's go on to settlement and other expenses. Settlement and other expenses, paragraph 12. So if by chance the buyer is asking for the seller to pay any of their closing costs or to provide closing cost assistance to them, this is the paragraph in which you would fill that out. It's 12A1B. And let's say we're asking for $1,500 in closing cost assistance. And remember, these are all negotiation tools. So always think and have conversations with your buyer client and your seller clients as to what's going to be the best for them and how this will set them up in the negotiation process. And looking for that desired outcome of either winning the bid, the offer, or coming out with the best outcome for your seller and buyer as far as pricing. All right, let's move on. Prorations, that paragraph obviously talks about taxes and what that looks like and how that's prorated by the title company. Paragraphs 14 is talking about casualty loss and insurance situations. I highly encourage you, again, remember, we're not dealing with everything in the contract. Please make sure you read paragraphs 15, 16, and understand what those mean and how to present and educate your client in regards to those paragraphs. Again, we talk about any type of attorney fees in a mediation situation that the prevailing party would be privy to having their costs reimbursed. And then escrow on paragraph 18, this talks about who the escrow agent is and how they look at expenses and what they do if a demand has taken place. Paragraph 19 talks about representations that the buyers and sellers have provided and done their due diligence, and the seller may continue to show the property and receive and negotiate backup offers. So it's spelled out right there. Paragraph 20 is talking about federal tax requirements. I encourage you, if one of your clients could be considered a foreign person, please reach out to your broker, reach out to the title company, and learn much more information about this. And there's also several classes out there available for this type of situation. Paragraph 21 is a really important paragraph. It's the notices paragraph, and I highly encourage you to complete this as much as you possibly can with either an email and or a phone number and or a physical address. It's very important that either party, the buyer's agent or the listing agent, does not take on more liability, that those notices are being delivered, whether they be hand, by mail, by fax, by electronic delivery, that those are going to the clients. And as we stated today, the only addendum that we've added onto the contract is that third-party financing addendum. So we would make a check mark there.
Alrighty.
All right, let's go back and look at the third-party financing addendum now, Maggie.
Absolutely. Everything looks good here, Kristi?
It does, and we'll flip back to this in just a minute because I want to talk about, after we talk about that third-party financing, just about that execution paragraph.
Absolutely. I'm saving now. We're going to pop back out and we'll pull up that third party.
All right. And if you'll notice, some things have been automatically saved because it carried through from the 1 to 4 family onto the third party financing. So we have our street address and city. And then if you'll scroll back down to the bottom, Maggie, you'll notice that we have our buyer and seller names on there.
I did see that. Zipforms is really nice about that. Whenever you add in your forms and start filling out information, it does look for corresponding fields on your other forms. So it saves you a little bit of time.
Perfect. So go ahead and go back up to the top of that third-party financing. So this is our third-party financing. And we did say on the first page of the 1 to 4 that this contract was subject to the buyer being approved for third-party financing. So that buyer is doing a conventional loan. So we're going to check 1A, and then we're also going to check the second 1A box that talks about the first mortgage loan and the principal amount of, we had 400,000 in this top blank. So the one, there we go. Oh, nope, you're on the second mortgage. Sorry, Maggie.
Oh, did I put in the wrong one? Oh, I did.
Yes, ma'am. That's okay. There you
There
go.
we go. What would I do without
See
Kristi?
how easy it is to make just little small mistakes. So Maggie, when we finish too, is going to show us a great way to find out how we can prevent mistakes before we send these contracts off to our buyers and sellers to initial and sign off on. So a $400,000 loan, and it's due in full. We're doing a 30-year mortgage. So we're going to type in 30 there. And an interest rate, I encourage you, always look for having that conversation with the lender, having the lender provide a pre-approval letter so that you understand some of the terms and what this buyer has been quote unquote pre-approved for. So let's say it's 3.5% interest. And again, we're doing a 30-year loan so that that interest rate is going to stick with the property for 30 years. And the estimated loan fees that are going to be associated with this origination, looking at 1.5%. It could be higher, it could be lower, but we're going to type in 1.5% right now. We're not doing a second mortgage, and then none of the others apply to us because we're doing a conventional loan. So we'll scroll down to the bottom of that page. And then this talks about the approval of financing. So the approval of financing described will be deemed to have been obtained when the buyer approval and the property approvals are obtained. This is one of the few times in our contracts that time is of the essence and strict compliance with time for performance is required. Super important when we see those bolded letters about timing. So again, buyer approval. So this contract is subject to buyer obtaining approval. So we're going to check 2A, and then we're going to give the buyer 12 days to have buyer approval. And remember, this is buyer approval, buyer's credit worthiness, and the terms of the loan that we wrote into the conventional loan on the top of this page being available to the buyer. This is not, the number of days do not associate with the property approval. Okay, so that's paragraph B. And it talks about the property approval and when that is to be obtained and when the buyer has the right to terminate based on this, on the property approval, okay? So on those 12 days, the buyer has 12 days to obtain their buyer approval and the terms of the loan being available. And if they can't, they have the right to terminate that contract and receive their earnest money back. We're not doing an FHA loan, so paragraph 4 does not apply to us. Authorization and release information. The buyer authorizes the buyer's lender to furnish to seller or buyer of their representative or the buyer's representative information relating to the status of the approval for financing. This is a great paragraph that was added in so that everybody can understand where this loan is in process and where the financing opportunities are in process so that we know we're all staying on the right timelines. And then we would have the buyer sign off on this. So Snoopy would sign this. So let's save this form and go back to the 1 to 4 family just for a quick second, Maggie.
Alrighty. Give me just a moment. Thought I
And we're
clicked on
going
it.
to
There
go
you
to the,
go.
absolutely. And we're going to go to the last page in the 1 to 4 family when you
Excellent.
jump
Should
in
pull up
there.
where we left off. Yeah. Last page.
So that execution page, so that is the last time. So we've submitted this offer now. Seller miraculously agreed to all of our terms. So the seller's agent, the listing agent, would actually fill in the date of acceptance. And let's say it was accepted on tomorrow, so December 15th. And this is the 15th day of December and then our year 2021. So remember that it's the last person of final acceptance. There's no more negotiations in regards to any of the initial documents because there could be an amendment once you've had your inspection and things of that nature that will go along with this. Maggie, let's show them where they can look at and see what all they filled in. That was a great tip that you had for us.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to go back up to the top so we can see it work. But that mistake that I made earlier, I just get so confused between the lines. They run together sometimes. So what I like to do when I'm checking to make sure everything's in its spot and filled out correctly is I can use this fast fill up here at the top. And when I click on it, it gives me just the fields and what the fields are. And it's going to be just a 1 by 1, line by line. And I can go through here and check to see if I've missed anything. Once I'm done and I've reviewed everything, it all looks great. I can come back up here. It now is called Viewer instead of the Fast Fill. Click on it and it's going to pull back the whole contract for me.
Great resource for us to just double check our work before we either one, send it to our buyers and sellers to initial and sign off on, or we have our mentor or our broker review our contracts. Always a great place to do. The other component is creating a critical dates list. As you notice, when we went through here, there were lots of 3 days and 5 days and 12 days and 2 days, making sure you as the buyer's agent are staying on top of those dates so that you can inform and communicate with your buyer client or with the listing agent in regards to those critical dates. Very, very, very important. Also, if we were doing, this is a purchase offer, this is a buyer consult, we would want to make sure that we've completed our information about brokerage services as well as a buyer representation agreement. Incredibly important for those things to be completed as well. Maggie, do you have any last tips for us today?
The only other tip that I would suggest when filling out the contract is after you've used the fast fill or you've gone through and checked all of your fields, they're completed as you need them to be. There is this little NA fill up here that's available to you guys. So what the NA does is any field that did not need information or we did not have information to give because it just doesn't apply for this particular contract, we can come up here and use the NA. And so any empty field that it finds in the current current form will be filled with the following text. And it can be in A, we could spell out not applicable. It could be whatever you need it to be. I usually go with NA. It's just real simple and short and sweet. Complete it the way you want. Hit apply. Now, instead of having those blank fields, and Kristi, we did so good today, it's going to fill them out for us.
I love that tip. What a great thing to just quickly go in and do it, and you don't have to worry about it when you're completing and walking through the contract. Great, great tip.
Absolutely.
Lastly, this really concludes our 2 forms and our quick overview of it. But again, I want to reiterate, for additional resources, remember to visit mymetrotex.com or the MetroTex YouTube channel for more videos and other valuable resources. Our YouTube channel is available to you at any time, mymetrotex.com. You can go in and check those class options for you and reach out and really hone your skills as a realtor member. If you do have any contract related questions or TREC related questions, please make sure you are reaching out to your broker. And also, as a Texas Realtor member, you may contact the Texas Realtors Legal Hotline. That is always available to you as a resource. And it's a really simple number, 873-9155. 800-873-9155. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll be back for more valuable tips along the way. But don't forget to check out mymetrotex.com or the MetroTex YouTube channel. Thanks again, Maggie, for all your help and helping today.
And thank you, Kristi. Well, hopefully we'll see everyone again sometime.